Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The sun hung low over the desert like a dying ember, bleeding orange across the cracked earth. Elias Crowe stood in the center of what used to be his land. 5 dusty acres passed down through generations, now flattened under the wheels of black trucks belonging to the Ashford brothers. His father's barn smoldered behind him, nothing but charred ribs of timber. But none of that hurt as much as the sight at his feet. His dog Boone, old loyal Boone, lying still in the dirt with a boot print on his side and a bullet hole in his neck. Elias sank to his knees, dust rising around him like smoke. The humiliation burned deeper than the grief. He had begged them. God help him. He had begged the Ashfords to leave Boone out of their feud. But they just laughed. 3 men with money, badges, and power, laughing at a man with nothing left but a rusted truck and a dog who trusted him. Elias touched Boone's fur, the heat fading, life slipping away. Then the eldest brother, Mason Ashford, kicked dirt onto Boone's body and said, "Land's ours now, Crow. You got till sunset to disappear." Elias didn't cry. He only whispered, "Not today." The Ashford brothers drove off, engines growling as their tires spit dust into the fading light. Elias stayed kneeling beside Boone until the last rumble faded over the horizon. The desert quiet was almost cruel. It made every memory louder. Boone curled beside him during cold nights. Boone barking at rattlesnakes under the porch. Boone licking Elias's face when the doctors told him his wife wasn't coming home. That dog had carried the last warmth Elias had left. And now he was gone. Wind slid across the broken land, lifting ashes from the burned barn like ghosts drifting toward the sky. Elias finally stood, his breath shaking, his hands trembling with something far hotter than grief. Rage. A deep, slow-burning rage he felt in his bones, something that had slept inside him for years. He looked toward the Ashfords' ranch, a mile of land bought with bribes, fear, and old blood. The brothers thought they owned this town. The sheriff was their cousin, the judge their drinking buddy, and the bank their weapon. Elias wiped dirt off Boone's fur and lifted him gently into the bed of his old truck. He whispered, "You didn't deserve this." Then he whispered something darker. "They do." The sky dimmed to purple as Elias drove toward town, the old Ford rattling over washboard dirt. Boone lay wrapped in Elias's old denim jacket, the one patched at the shoulders, the one Boone always slept on. Main Street flickered in the distance, neon signs buzzing, bar doors swinging, the world still moving while his had been shattered. He parked behind Miller's gas station, stepping out slowly, like every motion carried weight. Elias wasn't the violent type. He had swung enough fists in his youth to know it never solved anything. He had walked away from bar fights, stepped aside from trouble, let insults slide off him like rain on metal. But some things didn't slide. Some things settled in the soul like a stone. He walked to the sheriff's office, pushing through the door. Sheriff Colt Ashford sat behind his desk, boots up, hat tipped low, pretending surprise. Elias placed Boone's blood-stained collar on the desk. Colt didn't even blink, just sighed like Elias was an inconvenience. "Look, Crow," Colt said lazily. "My brothers said your mutt got aggressive. They defended themselves." Elias stared at him, voice low. "Boone didn't attack anyone." Colt shrugged. Then call it a tragic misunderstanding. Elias stared. This isn't over. Colt leaned back, smirking. Careful now. You don't want trouble you can't walk away from. Elias felt the room shrink. The humming fan overhead, the chipped paint on the walls, the photographs of the Ashfords smiling like saints during town ceremonies. The whole place stank of entitlement. Elias stepped back, breath tight, trying to keep the storm inside him from breaking loose. He walked out of the station, the door banging behind him as dusk settled deeper across the town. Outside, the streetlights blinked on, buzzing like angry insects. A few locals watched him with pity. Others looked away entirely, afraid of what crossing the Ashfords might cost them. Elias walked toward his truck, each step heavier than the last. He slid into the driver's seat, staring at Boone's still form in the back. He whispered, "They think they broke me." His jaw clenched, his pulse hammered. His vision blurred with heat and grief. For a moment, he slammed his fists into the steering wheel until the horn cracked. He breathed hard, rough, ragged. The kind of breath a man takes before something inside him snaps. Elias wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Boone, promise you, I'm done being quiet." Elias didn't drive home. He turned away from the road that led to the ashes of his old life and pointed the truck toward the edge of town, toward an old place no one visited anymore. A scrapyard that once belonged to his father. Buried under broken metal and rust were pieces of a past he had tried to forget. He parked and stepped into the cool night air, the desert wind whispering across piles of twisted steel. He moved with purpose, brushing aside debris, kicking away loose panels until he reached a half-buried metal chest. His hands shook as he pulled it free. The hinges screamed when he opened it. Inside lay a worn leather holster, a .357 revolver, and a box of ammunition, 40 rounds tucked away for a day his father prayed would never come. Elias lifted the gun, the weight familiar, heavy, honest. He loaded it slowly, each bullet clicking into place like a promise. He holstered it, breathing deeply, eyes burning with fury and heartbreak. Then he whispered the words that would change the fate of the town forever. One bullet at a time. Behind him, headlights appeared on the ridge. 3 trucks approaching fast. The Ashford brothers weren't finished. And neither was he. Before the smoke and blood, the Crowe Ranch had been quiet, the kind of place where mornings smelled like coffee and rain-soaked dirt. Elias used to rise before the sun, brushing dust off his jeans while Boone trotted beside him, tail wagging, ready for another day. The land wasn't much, just a stretch of stubborn soil clinging to life in the Mojave heat, but it was his. His father, Hank Crowe, had carved that land out of nothing with bare hands and a rusted plow. "You take care of it, boy," he'd said once, eyes wrinkled under his hat. "And it'll take care of you." But that was before the drought hit. Before the Ashfords started buying up every acre around him, waving money and papers signed by judges they already owned. Elias held out longer than anyone, believing that hard work could still beat corruption. He sold his last herd to pay the taxes, patched fences alone, and told Boone they'd make it another season. But when the rains never came and the bank called his note early, he saw the writing in the dust. The Ashfords didn't just want his land, they wanted his name gone with it. It started small, a few missing fence posts, a busted water line, cattle spooked in the night. Elias found tire tracks leading from the Ashfords' ranch more than once. He'd reported it, but the sheriff, Colt Ashford, would just laugh. Coyotes, Crowe. Always been that way. Then the threats started coming in person. Mason Ashford, the eldest, wore his wealth like armor. Starched shirts, silver belt buckle, a pistol polished to a shine. He'd ride up in his black truck, lean out the window and grin. "Sell it, Elias. Be smart. Nobody's got to get hurt." Elias would stand his ground every time, Boone growling low beside him. "This land ain't for sale." Mason would smile wider. "Then it's for taking." It was never about the dirt. The Ashfords wanted the pipeline deal beneath it. Oil money buried under generations of Crow sweat. When Elias refused, they poisoned his well, torched his fences, and bought off every neighbor who might have helped him. One by one, the lights around his property went dark. But Elias didn't leave. He fixed what they broke. He patched what they burned. And when he prayed, it wasn't for peace. It was for strength to keep standing. Elias wasn't always alone. His wife, June, had been the heart that kept the ranch alive long after it stopped paying. She was soft-spoken, with eyes that could calm storms and a way of laughing that made the house feel bigger. They'd met at the county fair. He'd won her a glass horse by shooting bottles off a rail. For a while the land thrived. June tended to the garden, Boone guarded the porch, and Elias believed they'd beat the odds. But the fever came one spring, sudden and merciless. By the time the doctor arrived from town, it was too late. The house fell silent. Elias buried her under the willow near the creek, marked the spot with a stone, and stopped singing in the mornings. After that, Boone became more than a dog. He became the echo of everything Elias had lost. They shared meals, long drives, and quiet nights by the radio. People in town called him the last rancher standing, but they said it with pity, not pride. And when the Ashfords came back to press harder, they didn't see a grieving man. They saw weakness. They mistook silence for surrender. They mistook patience for fear. That mistake was what sealed their fate. On a dry evening months before the fire, Mason Ashford had invited Elias to the bar. Just to talk. Against his better judgment, Elias went, hoping to end things peacefully. The place smelled of whiskey, oil, and deceit. Music buzzed from the jukebox while locals pretended not to stare. Mason leaned in, smile slick as oil. "Sign over the deed, and I'll make sure the sheriff forgets those overdue taxes." Elias stared into his glass. "You can't buy what ain't for sale." Mason chuckled. "Everyone's for sale, Crowe. Some just don't know their price yet." Then he said something that froze the air. "Your dog's worth less than a bullet, and your wife ain't here to feed him." The bar went silent. Elias didn't speak. He just stood, turned, and walked out into the desert night, Boone trailing behind him. But that was the night Elias realized something deeper. The Ashfords weren't just thieves. They were disease. And every man who let them thrive was infected. From that night on, Elias stopped hoping for justice. He started counting bullets. Now, standing in the scrapyard under a moon half hidden by clouds, Elias remembered that night with every breath. Boone's death wasn't an accident. It was the final push. He'd spent years letting the law fail him, letting the town rot under the Ashfords' name. But not anymore. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the original deed to the Crowe Ranch, signed by his father in faded ink. He ran his thumb over the name like it was a gravestone. Then he tucked it into his jacket. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, though the sky was clear. Maybe it was trucks. Maybe it was fate rolling in. He holstered the revolver again, checked the chamber, and looked toward the faint lights of the town. It was time. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel tired. He felt alive, dangerous, certain. The man they'd left broken was walking back into their world with fire in his veins. Boone's collar hung from the rearview mirror, swaying gently in the wind. Elias whispered to it, voice steady and cold. "You and me, old boy. Tonight we start taking back what's ours." Then he drove toward the lights. Midnight bled into the desert like ink, swallowing the horizon. The town slept under a bruised sky, but Elias Crowe was wide awake. Headlights off as his truck rolled silent down the back road leading to Ashford territory. Boone's collar swung from the mirror, clinking softly with each bump, a rhythm that kept him grounded. In the passenger seat sat the revolver, polished under the moonlight, loaded with purpose. Elias had no plan for mercy. He parked a quarter-mile out, boots sinking into dry sand as he stepped into the night. Crickets whispered, the wind hummed through old mesquite trees, and the faint sound of laughter drifted from the Ashfords' mechanic shop, one of their many businesses. Through the windows, Elias saw two of their men playing cards under a flickering light. He recognized them. The younger one, Jesse, had poured gasoline on his barn. The older one, Briggs, was Mason's right hand. Elias crouched behind a stack of rusted oil drums, breathing steady. His pulse was calm, too calm. He wasn't a soldier, but grief had made him one. He cocked the revolver softly, the click swallowed by the desert wind, and whispered to the dark, "Boone, this one's for you." The first shot cracked like lightning. Briggs fell before he even saw where it came from, chair tipping backward, cards scattering in the air like confetti from hell. Jesse dove for cover, shouting, "Who the hell?" But Elias was already moving. He fired again, the bullet punching through glass and wood, sending sparks off a metal frame. Jesse stumbled out, bleeding from the shoulder, clutching his arm. "You don't have to do this," he yelled, voice breaking. Elias stepped into the light, face shadowed by his hat, eyes cold as the desert night. "You already did," he said, and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed down Main Street, bouncing off the walls of sleeping shops. Silence followed, thick, final, like a prayer. Elias reloaded slowly, each shell clinking softly onto the dirt. His hands didn't shake. Not once. He wasn't proud. He wasn't satisfied. He was just empty. Inside, the radio still played from the corner, a soft country song crackling through static. Elias stood there for a long moment, staring at the two men, then turned and walked back toward his truck. He didn't look back. The war had begun, and there was no turning it off now. By sunrise, the whole town was whispering. 2 men dead, bullets clean, no witnesses. The sheriff's office was in chaos, deputies pacing while Colt Ashford tried to keep his voice even. "Find out who did it," he barked. "No excuses." But under the brim of his hat, sweat ran down his neck. He knew who. Everyone did. Elias Crowe's name hung in the air like smoke. By mid-morning, Colt's brothers, Mason and Roy, stormed into the office, faces red, tempers flaring. "We can't let this slide," Mason growled. "He's coming for us." Colt clenched his jaw. "We'll handle it. Quietly." Mason slammed his fist on the desk. "No. We bury him." Outside, the townsfolk watched from behind curtains as black trucks tore through the streets. Word spread fast. Elias Crowe had gone mad. But among the whispers, some people smiled quietly. The Ashfords had ruled this town with fear for years. Maybe fear was changing sides. In a small diner, old man Miller muttered to his wife, "'Bout time someone did something." The town wasn't siding with Elias yet. Not out loud. But for the first time in a decade, the Ashfords looked nervous. And fear Elias knew was contagious. Elias didn't run. He spent the day buried deep in the desert, parked inside a half-collapsed barn on the outskirts, watching dust devils dance across the sand. He wasn't thinking about escape, only what came next. He had written 3 names in a small notebook: Mason, Colt, Roy. He drew a line through the first 2 dead men, Briggs and Jesse, and stared at the remaining names like they were coordinates. Boone's collar hung from the rear view, glinting softly. He whispered, "They'll come, boy. They'll come, and I'll be ready." As the sun sank low, he took apart the revolver, cleaning it with an old rag, each motion slow and careful. He thought of June, her laughter, the smell of coffee on the porch. He thought of Boone running through the fields. Then he thought of Mason's grin, that smirk when he'd kicked dirt on Boone's body. The rage came back like a tide. He loaded the revolver again, tucked it under his jacket, and stepped outside. In the distance, engines roared. 3 trucks fanning out across the desert, headlights cutting through twilight. Elias smiled faintly, dust curling around his boots. "Guess you boys couldn't wait your turn," he muttered. The trucks circled the ruins like vultures, engines rumbling, doors slamming. Mason's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Crowe, we know you're here. Come out, and maybe we'll give you a clean death." Elias crouched low behind an overturned trough, counting their steps by sound. The desert wind whistled through the wreckage, carrying the faint jingle of Boone's collar as it swayed from his belt. His breath came slow, deliberate. He'd spent years fixing fences and watching storms roll in. He knew how to wait. One of the men kicked open the barn door, shotgun raised. The moment his boots crossed the beam of moonlight, Elias fired once, straight through the chest. Chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the night, wood splintering, sparks flying. Elias moved like smoke, vanishing between shadows, firing with precision. By the time the dust settled, 2 trucks were riddled with holes, and the third peeled away into the dark, tires screaming. Mason's voice was gone, replaced by silence. Elias reloaded, each click echoing in the stillness. Then, somewhere beyond the wreckage, a faint groan. He stepped closer. On the ground lay Roy Ashford, bloodied but breathing. Elias knelt beside him, gun steady. "Tell your brothers," he said softly. "I'm coming." By dawn, smoke curled over the desert like the ghosts of old battles. The Ashfords' men had torched 3 barns, shot up the feed store, and smashed windows along Main Street, all in the name of sending a message. But the message hit differently. People weren't scared of Elias Crowe anymore. They were scared of the men trying to silence him. From his seat inside an abandoned church at the edge of town, Elias watched the glow from the fires on the horizon. Dust hung in the air like ash, filtering the morning sun into gold and blood. His revolver sat beside a half-empty bottle of whiskey. Across the pews lay his old friend, Hank Mercer, a mechanic who once worked for the Ashfords before they ruined his shop. "You stirred up a hornet's nest," Hank muttered, lighting a cigarette. Elias didn't look up. "They stung first." Hank took a drag, exhaling smoke toward the broken stained glass window. "You keep this up, they'll burn the whole town down." Elias finally turned to him, eyes hollow but burning. "Then we make sure they burn with it." Word of Elias spread faster than the fire. Folks whispered his name in diners, in gas stations, even in the schoolyard. Some said he was a ghost, others called him a vigilante. The truth didn't matter, only the story did. "Crow's taking back the town," they said. "He's doing what the law's too scared to." Inside a small bar on the outskirts, the radio crackled to life with a trembling voice. 2 men found dead, believed to be connected to the Ashford family. Authorities are still investigating. Then static. Mason Ashford slammed his fist into the counter, shattering a glass. "Investigating," he roared. "They should be hunting." Colt leaned in, calmer but colder. "They are hunting. Just not for him." He slid a wad of bills toward the bounty hunter beside him, a tall man with a scar under his left eye and a calm, measured stare. "Name's Wade Cutter," he said, voice smooth as sandpaper. "You want Crow gone, he's gone." Mason smirked. "Make him suffer first." Wade adjusted his hat. "That'll cost extra." The bar went quiet. Outside, thunder rolled over the desert, a rare sound in a dry land, like God clearing his throat before the storm. The next evening, Elias and Hank drove into town under cover of dusk. Their old Chevy rattled down Main Street, headlights off, the smell of smoke still thick from the night before. The town looked broken. Burnt fences, shattered glass, fear in every doorway. But something else simmered beneath it. Defiance. At Miller's Diner, a few locals nodded subtly as Elias passed. One even whispered, "We're with you, Crow." Elias said nothing, just tipped his hat and kept walking. Inside the diner, Hank spread out a map on the counter. "The Ashfords' oil rigs sit on the North Ridge. You hit that, you hit their wallet." Elias studied the map quietly. "And Cutter?" Hank hesitated. "He's real good, Eli. Sheriff. Quiet type. The kind that kills once and doesn't miss." Elias looked up, expression unreadable. "Then he and I will get along just fine." He folded the map, grabbed his coat, and stepped back into the twilight. Somewhere far off, the hum of a motorcycle echoed, a low growl cutting through the desert silence. Hank turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing. "Too soon," he muttered. But Elias didn't slow down. He just said softly, "It's never too soon for a reckoning." Cutter found him by the old windmill, standing in the open, as if waiting for judgment. The bounty hunter dismounted his bike, dust swirling around his boots, the sound of the engine fading into the endless hum of crickets. "You Crow?" he asked, voice calm, eyes sharp. Elias nodded, revolver holstered but ready. "You here for the bounty?" Cutter smirked. "I don't chase ghosts. But you're making it real tempting." For a long moment neither moved. The windmill creaked. The desert held its breath. Then, in a flash, Cutter drew first. Fast, clean, professional. The bullet grazed Elias's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He dropped to one knee, fired twice. One shot hit dirt, the other clipped Cutter's arm, sending his gun flying. They circled each other in silence, both bleeding, both too proud to fall. Cutter chuckled low. "You ain't half bad." Elias wiped blood from his arm. "You ain't half paid." Then he lunged, tackling Cutter to the ground, fists cracking against bone and grit. The fight was brutal, no style, no mercy, just survival. When it ended, both men were gasping, faces smeared with dust and blood, the windmill still turning overhead. Cutter spat out dirt and muttered, "Guess they were right about you." Elias stood, chest heaving, looking down at the man who'd come to kill him. "You gonna finish it?" Cutter asked, voice raspy. Elias aimed his revolver but didn't pull the trigger. "No," he said. "You've got a message to deliver." Cutter blinked through the blood. "Message?" Elias stepped closer, his shadow falling over the man. "Tell the Ashfords I'm not hiding. Tell them I'm coming for their oil, their money, their pride. And when it's all gone, I'm coming for them." He holstered his revolver, turned and walked back toward his truck, limping but unbroken. Behind him, Cutter lay in the dust, staring at the stars, half laughing, half coughing. "Damn fool," he whispered. "You're gonna burn this whole place down." Elias climbed into his truck, Boone's collar swinging from the mirror, reflecting the dying light. The wind carried the scent of smoke again, maybe from town, maybe from memory. As he drove off into the desert, lightning cracked across the horizon. The storm had finally come, and in its heart rode Elias Crowe, part man, part myth, all vengeance. The night the oil field burned, the desert sky glowed like hell itself had opened its jaws. Elias Crowe stood on the ridge above the Ashfords refinery, a black bandana over his mouth, watching the flames dance against steel tanks and pipelines. The air shimmered with heat and gunpowder, the sound of popping metal echoing across the valley. He'd rigged the charges himself, a mechanic's precision guided by a soldier's rage. As the first tank exploded, the shockwave hit like thunder. Oil sprayed into the wind, raining down like black rain. "Boone," he whispered, gripping the dog's worn collar in his hand. "This one's for you, boy." His old truck waited behind him, headlights off, engine idling low. From below came the shouts of men, their voices carried by the wind. Panic, confusion, orders lost in chaos. He turned away from the inferno and started walking down the ridge, slow and steady, a silhouette against the fire. Each step left a trail of dust and destiny. Elias Crowe was no longer just fighting for his land. He was making sure they'd never steal another inch of anyone else's. In town, people woke to the orange glow in the sky and the low rumble of distant explosions. Mason Ashford threw open his window and stared at the horizon, the fire reflecting in his whiskey glass. "He did it," he muttered. Colt burst through the door, shirt half-buttoned, pistol in hand. "The rigs are gone, Mason. Half the fields are burning." Mason slammed his fist on the table. "He's killing my business." Colt leaned closer. "He's killing your empire." Mason's face twisted with rage. "Then we kill him slow." He turned to his men. "Find him. I don't care what it takes. Drag him here alive." Across the street, old Sheriff Dean sat in his darkened office, watching the same fire from behind a cracked window. His badge sat on the desk, gathering dust. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand and sighed. "I should have stopped this when it started," he muttered. Then he holstered his gun for the first time in months and stepped into the street. The storm Elias had started wasn't just burning oil. It was burning through the soul of the entire town. By dawn, the refinery was nothing but smoking skeletons and pools of slick, burning tar. Elias drove through the ruins, headlights cutting through ash and steam. He stopped beside a twisted oil pump, its metal arm still creaking in the heat, and climbed out. His boots sank into the blackened mud as he scanned the destruction. He didn't smile. There was no joy in vengeance, only silence. He knelt, pressing Boone's collar into the charred ground, whispering, "You're free now, boy." Then a sound, gravel crunching. He spun around, gun drawn. It was Cutter, the bounty hunter, arm still bandaged, eyes weary but alert. "Told him you were dead," he said. "Guess I lied." Elias aimed the gun steady. "Why come back?" Cutter shrugged. "Because I'm tired of hunting the wrong man." He tossed his badge into the flames. "You want to finish this? You'll need help." Elias studied him for a long moment, then lowered the gun. "You ain't got a death wish." Cutter smirked. "I got nothin' else." The two men stood side by side as the refinery groaned and collapsed, sparks flying into the dawn. For the first time, Elias wasn't alone in the fire. The Ashfords struck back before sunset. Black trucks tore through the desert toward the ruins, dust spiraling behind them like angry ghosts. Elias and Cutter heard them coming. They took cover behind a rusted fuel tank, the heat still rising from the ground. "They'll flank us," Cutter muttered, checking his rifle. "Let 'em," Elias replied, eyes cold and steady. The trucks skidded to a stop, armed men fanning out, shouting his name. The firefight erupted like lightning in dry brush. Bullets tore through the air, sparks dancing off metal. Cutter dropped two with clean headshots. Elias moved like a shadow, reloading with practiced calm. One bullet grazed his cheek. Another shattered the windshield of his truck. "You wanted a war," he shouted over the chaos. "Now you got one." When the smoke cleared, 5 men lay dead. The rest fled back toward town. Cutter leaned against the wreckage, bleeding from the shoulder. "They'll come again." Elias nodded, staring after the fleeing trucks. "Good," he said. "Then I won't have to hunt him." The desert fell quiet again, except for the crackle of dying flames. But the silence didn't bring peace. It brought promise. That night, Elias returned to the church where Hank waited, the air thick with the smell of burnt oil and sweat. Hank stared at the blood on Elias's jacket. "You look like hell." Elias dropped Boone's collar on the table beside him. "Hell's all I got left." Hank poured him a drink. "You know what comes next, right? Mason won't stop till he buries you." Elias took the glass but didn't drink. "Then he better start digging fast." Cutter limped through the door, grimacing. "We'll need ammo, fuel, and eyes on the road. They'll regroup by sunrise." Hank nodded. "I can get us some help." Elias looked at both men, the faintest flicker of something human passing through his eyes. Hope, maybe, or what was left of it. "This ends in town," he said quietly. "Where it started." He rose, the wind howling outside like a warning. Through the broken church window, the first stars began to shine over the desert, cold, distant, unblinking. Elias holstered his gun, tilted his hat low, and stepped into the night. Behind him, the church candles flickered out. Ahead, the town of Ashford Ridge waited, unaware it was about to meet the ghost it created. Ashford Ridge was quiet the morning after the refinery burned. Too quiet. The air hung heavy with the smell of smoke and oil, and the sky was the color of old steel. People whispered as they swept their porches or peered through cracked blinds, wondering what would happen next. The Ashfords had ruled the town for years, through fear, money, and control, but now the cracks were showing. Elias Crowe had become something they couldn't buy or threaten. An idea. At Miller's diner, old man Riker leaned over his coffee and said, "They took his land, killed his dog, and thought that'd be the end. Now he's coming for their souls." Across the counter, young Lila Harper, who'd lost her brother working the rigs, whispered, "He's not wrong." Outside, a group of men loaded rifles into the back of a truck, the Ashfords' enforcers tightening their grip. But for the first time, some townsfolk didn't look away. They watched. They waited. And in that waiting, something shifted. Not in the Ashfords' favor. Because when fear lingers too long, it eventually turns into fire. Elias, Cutter, and Hank watched from the ridge overlooking the town. The lights of Ashford Ridge flickered below like dying embers. "They're scared," Hank said quietly. "Not scared enough," Elias replied. Cutter loaded his rifle, his arm still stiff from the firefight. "They will be." Mason's losing his grip, and men like him make mistakes when they're desperate. Elias lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating the scars on his face. "We'll push him till he breaks." Hank glanced at him. "And when he does?" Elias exhaled smoke through his nose, staring at the town. "Then I bury what's left." The wind howled through the canyons, carrying the faint hum of engines below, the Ashfords' trucks circling the streets enforcing curfew. Cutter adjusted his scope, eyes narrowing. "They're herding the town like cattle." Elias crushed the cigarette under his boot. "Then it's time the herd fought back." He turned to Hank. "You still got friends down there?" Hank nodded. "Enough to start a fire." Elias looked out at the horizon, the same desert that took everything from him, and whispered, "Then let's give it back." The plan for the rebellion had begun, and by dawn, there'd be no turning back. Inside Mason Ashford's mansion, the atmosphere had turned volatile. Colt stood by the window, shotgun across his chest, watching headlights move through the dark. Mason paced the floor, tie undone, veins bulging in his neck. "He's turning the town against me," Mason spat. "The people are just scared," Colt replied, though he didn't sound convinced. "Then make them more scared," Mason barked. He turned to the table where a photo of his father, the man who'd built the oil empire, stared down at him. "This town forgot who owns it." Colt hesitated. "Maybe they're just tired of being owned." Mason's eyes snapped up, sharp as broken glass. "Careful, brother." The air between them thickened. "I've buried men for less." Colt didn't flinch. "Then maybe that's why you're standing alone." He left the room, slamming the door behind him. Mason turned back to the window. His reflection fractured in the glass, firelight flickering from the distance. His empire was crumbling, and for the first time he could feel it slipping through his fingers. Outside, thunder rolled low and mean. Somewhere in that darkness, Elias Crowe was coming. Mason poured a drink with a trembling hand. "Come then," he muttered. "Let's finish this." By midnight, the rebellion began. Quietly. A gas station worker named Roy slipped a crate of ammo under the diner's floorboards. A teenage boy spray-painted "Crow Lives" across the courthouse steps. Lila Harper stole medical supplies from the clinic. Small acts, dangerous, defiant, but they spread like wildfire. The people of Ashford Ridge were done being silent. From the ridge, Elias watched the flickers of activity through binoculars. His heart heavy but proud. "They're risin'," Hank said, voice full of awe. Cutter smirked. "Hell, they might actually pull this off." Elias didn't answer. He was thinking of Boone, of his father's ranch, of everything that had turned to dust. He wasn't fighting just for revenge anymore. He was fighting so this town would never bow again. The first explosion came from the old grain mill, a distraction just as planned. Then the power went out across Ashford Ridge. Blackout. Panic. Silence. Elias chambered around and looked at Cutter. "We move on the house." Cutter nodded. "Straight into the lion's den." Elias pulled his hat low, eyes like gunmetal. "No," he said. "Into the lion's grave." The trio descended the ridge under cover of darkness, headlights off, the hum of the storm building behind them. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the outline of Mason Ashford's mansion, a fortress glowing faintly through the rain. The sound of gunfire echoed from the far end of town. The rebellion had begun in earnest. Elias gripped the steering wheel tight, every nerve burning. Hank loaded shells in the back seat. Cutter cleaned the mud off his blade. "We might not come back from this," Hank muttered. Elias didn't take his eyes off the road. "We ain't supposed to." They rolled up on the gates just as the rain began to fall, thick and heavy. Cutter stepped out first, slicing through the lock with one clean motion. Elias parked the truck, stepped into the storm, and felt the cold water wash over his face, like baptism in fire. "Let's end this," he said, voice steady. Thunder boomed overhead as the three men walked toward the mansion, lightning painting them in flashes of silver and shadow. Inside, Mason Ashford waited with a shotgun and a bottle of bourbon, muttering to himself. The final storm had begun, and Ashford Ridge would never be the same again. The sun had begun its slow crawl toward the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows over the desert town of Ashford Ridge. Dust swirled like restless spirits through the empty streets, settling over shattered barrels, cracked windows, and the remnants of hastily erected barricades. From the ridges above, Elias watched, eyes narrowed, as a lone pickup rumbled down Main Street, tires kicking up clouds of sand. The town's few remaining residents had begun to emerge from their hiding spots, fists clenched, hearts hammering. The air vibrated with the tension of impending chaos, each footstep a drumbeat toward the inevitable clash. From behind a crumbling adobe wall, a young man whispered orders, echoing Elias's strategy. Divide, confuse, and strike when the enemy least expected it. Cutter's hand rested lightly on the hammer of his revolver as he crouched behind a rusted water tank. The man's eyes were sharp, calculating, every twitch of his fingers measured. Beside him, Hank checked the safety on his rifle, scanning the horizon for any sign of Mason's enforcers. Dust and heat made the air shimmer, giving the desert an almost otherworldly, threatening quality. A sudden clang of metal echoed from the opposite alley, and Cutter's head snapped toward the sound. Shadows moved unnaturally against the sunlit walls, signaling that Mason's men were aware of the approaching siege. Elias motioned sharply, and they slipped forward like predators, silent, patient, ready to strike at the heart of the corruption that had poisoned their town. On the ground below, the townspeople were no longer hiding. Women and men dragged overturned wagons to form barriers, while children clutched whatever makeshift weapons they could find. Old men, once frail and broken, now carried shotguns that glinted in the dying sunlight, their hands steady despite years of hardship. The sound of hurried footsteps, punctuated by the creak of wood and metal, became a rhythm of resistance. Every glance, every movement carried a weight of desperation and courage. Elias felt a strange swell in his chest. Not fear, not triumph, but the raw power of collective defiance. This was no longer just his fight. It was the fight of every soul Mason had tried to crush. Suddenly, a single shot rang out, deafening against the desert silence. The echo bounced between the canyon walls, a signal that Mason's men were awake, ready, and deadly. Bullets ricocheted off walls, and chaos erupted like fire in dry grass. Elias rolled behind the edge of a low stone wall, feeling the heat of a near miss graze his jacket. Cutter fired with precision, each round knocking an enemy off balance, while Hank provided cover, his eyes burning with determination. From every rooftop and alley, flashes of defiance and terror intertwined, shouts of anger, cries of pain, and the steady pulse of resistance. The town had become a battlefield, each shadow a potential threat, each heartbeat a gamble between life and death. By dusk, Ashford Ridge had transformed into a war zone. Smoke rose from overturned wagons, mingling with the red-orange glow of the setting sun. Elias climbed atop the ridge, scanning the streets below, heart pounding with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The townspeople had bought them time, weakening Mason's defenses, scattering his men like startled crows. And yet Mason's mansion loomed ahead, a dark monolith of greed and cruelty. Elias felt the weight of the coming confrontation pressing against his chest. One final push, one last strategy, and the nightmare that had stolen everything from him would finally meet its reckoning. With a deep, steadying breath, he descended, revolver in hand, ready to take their town, one bullet at a time. The moon hung low over Ashford Ridge, pale and unforgiving, casting long, eerie shadows across Mason's mansion. The once pristine estate now bore the marks of panic and fear. Shattered windows, splintered doors, and scorch marks from the townspeople's resistance. Elias crouched behind a toppled fence, his revolver cold and heavy in his hand, heart hammering with anticipation. Cutter and Hank flanked him, their breathing measured but tense. Every step toward the mansion felt like wading through a storm of memory and vengeance. Each creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the desert wind was a warning. Elias's eyes caught the flicker of movement in the second-floor windows. Mason's enforcers were waiting. He whispered a silent prayer, not to God, but to the dog that had once been his loyal companion, whose death had ignited this inferno of retribution. Inside, Mason's men scrambled to reinforce the barricades, unaware that Elias had already infiltrated the outer courtyard. Shadows danced across the walls as bullets tore through the air, punctuated by shouts and the metallic clatter of gunfire. Cutter dropped a man silently from the balcony with a well-aimed shot. Hank flanked another, dragging him behind a collapsed wall. Dust and smoke mingled with the metallic tang of blood, painting the scene with raw, chaotic realism. Every hallway, every creaking staircase became a gauntlet, and yet Elias moved forward, driven not by hatred alone, but by a desperate need to reclaim the soul of his town. He could almost hear his dog's bark in the echoes of the chaos, a spectral reminder of why he could not fail. They reached the grand hall, where Mason waited, smug and untouchable, flanked by his elite enforcers. The chandelier above swayed slightly from a previous shot, scattering light like shards of broken glass across the marble floor. Mason's voice, cold and dripping with arrogance, called out, mocking the ragtag fighters that had dared to invade his fortress. Elias stepped forward, eyes blazing, heart pounding, the weight of every loss he'd endured pressing into his chest. "This ends tonight," he said quietly, almost to himself, before raising his revolver. The room froze in the suspended breath of inevitability. Every gunman, every townsperson, and every shadow waited for the first shot, knowing it would ignite the climax of this long-brewing storm. The battle erupted in an orchestra of chaos and fury. Shots rang out in rapid succession, the smell of gunpowder thick and suffocating. Mason's men fell one by one, their arrogance and greed no match for the raw, desperate skill of Elias and his allies. Cutter and Hank fought like demons, each movement precise, yet fueled by righteous fury. Mason ducked behind a fallen pillar, his eyes wide with disbelief, unable to grasp that the people he had terrorized were not just resisting, they were winning. Elias's hand shook slightly as he took aim, the memory of his dog flashing in his mind, every lost hour and stolen acre fueling the finger that squeezed the trigger. One by one, bullets found their marks, and Mason's empire of cruelty began to crumble around him. By dawn, the mansion was quiet, save for the heavy breathing of the survivors and the distant wind whispering across the desert. Mason lay defeated, disarmed, and utterly broken, his power reduced to nothing more than a shadow on the cold marble floor. Elias walked through the wreckage, heart pounding, eyes scanning for any sign of further threat. Cutter and Hank followed, silent but steady, shoulders tense yet proud. The town of Ashford Ridge had been reclaimed, its people emboldened and alive. Elias stood at the mansion's highest balcony, watching the first rays of sunlight touch the desert horizon. The grief, the loss, and the rage that had driven him here now softened into a hard-won sense of justice. One final breath, one last glance at the wrecked town, and he knew. The nightmare had ended and a new dawn, fragile, bright, and free, had begun. The desert air was crisp, carrying the scent of scorched wood and gunpowder. Elias rode through the outskirts of Ashford Ridge, the early sunlight glinting off his worn revolver, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of dusty gold. The town was slowly stirring, townspeople emerging from their homes with wary eyes, mouths half-whispering prayers of relief and disbelief. He could see the houses that had been vandalized, the fences torn down, and the echoes of Mason's reign of terror still lingering like smoke above the streets. Each step he took brought back memories. The stolen land, the nights spent hungry, the sound of his dog's final howl, and he clenched his jaw, knowing the coming confrontation wasn't with Mason alone, but with every lingering shadow of fear that had gripped this town. Mason sat slumped in the ruins of the town hall, his pride shattered, his empire reduced to nothing more than splintered wood and shattered glass. He looked up at Elias, eyes wide, realizing that vengeance was not just a rumor whispered in the dust but a living, breathing force that had come for him. "You think this changes anything?" Mason rasped, voice trembling with the last embers of defiance. Elias dismounted, boots crunching over broken tiles, heart pounding not from fear but from the weight of what was about to be decided. Cutter and Hank flanked him silently, their faces grim but steady, embodying the silent judgment of the town itself. Every step toward Mason was heavy with the memories of every wrong, every betrayal, every stolen moment of peace. The townspeople slowly gathered behind Elias, their faces a mix of hope, fear, and righteous anger. Mothers clutched children to their chests. Men and women stood with hands on makeshift weapons, all of them witnessing the confrontation that would define their lives. Elias didn't speak at first, letting the silence stretch, letting Mason feel the gravity of the lives he had upended. Then, in a low, steady voice, he said, "Justice isn't mercy, Mason. You'll answer for every life you've ruined." The words hung in the air like a drawn-out note, heavy and undeniable. For a moment, the only sound was the desert wind, whispering secrets of the past and promises of freedom yet to be fully realized. Mason's defiance cracked, replaced by a shadow of fear, a recognition that power built on terror could crumble in an instant. Elias raised his hand, signaling Cutter and Hank to stand down, but his eyes never left Mason's. The moment was electric, charged with years of pain and a lifetime of stolen dignity. He wanted Mason to understand, to see every moment of cruelty he had inflicted reflected back in the eyes of those he had oppressed. The townspeople's murmurs grew louder, a chorus of voices demanding closure, demanding truth. And for the first time, Mason truly saw the town he had destroyed, felt the weight of every stolen acre, every scream, every heartbreak, and realized that he was not the master of this desert. He had never been. Finally, Elias lowered his revolver, the sun now cresting the horizon, casting long, warm light over the desert town. Mason slumped further, defeated not just physically but spiritually, stripped bare by the sheer force of collective justice. The town erupted in cautious relief, the tension dissolving into murmurs of gratitude and whispered prayers for the future. Elias turned toward the streets, toward the people who had suffered alongside him, and allowed himself a small, weary smile. Cutter clapped him on the shoulder, Hank nodded silently, and together they watched Ashford Ridge awaken, bruised but alive. The reckoning had been met, the town had survived, and for the first time in years, Elias felt the fragile stirrings of peace, knowing that tomorrow, they could finally rebuild what had been taken, one sun-soaked day at a time. The morning sun burned golden across Ashford Ridge, casting long shadows over streets that had once been silent under fear. Elias walked slowly through the town, boots scuffing the sand, eyes tracing the remnants of destruction that now seemed almost sacred. Every broken fence, every scorched doorway a testament to what had been lost and what had been reclaimed. Children peeked from behind shuttered windows, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and hope, as if seeing a hero rise from the dust. Women called greetings, their voices trembling with relief, carrying the fragile laughter of a town learning to breathe again. Elias felt the weight of every wrong lifted just slightly, replaced by a solemn determination. The town would be rebuilt, stronger and fairer than before, brick by brick, heart by heart. Mason had been handed over to the lawless roads beyond the desert, left to wander the empty expanse, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. Elias had insisted the punishment fit the ruin he had caused. Not a quick shot, but exile, a slow unraveling that would make him reckon with every memory of pain he had inflicted. Cutter and Hank rode beside him, surveying the town with pride tempered by exhaustion. They helped neighbors repair roofs, mend fences, and carry supplies, their presence a tangible reminder that justice was not just about revenge. It was about rebuilding lives and restoring dignity. Even the weather seemed to soften, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and warm earth, a quiet benediction over the streets of Ashford Ridge. By midday, the town square was alive with movement. merchants setting up stalls again, horses neighing in corrals, and children racing through dusty alleys, their laughter filling the air with a sound Elias thought he had forgotten. The old well, once neglected, sparkled with fresh water, a symbol of renewal, and Elias paused there, running his hands along the worn stone, feeling the pulse of life returning to the town. Every glance at the people around him reminded him that what had been stolen could now be restored, not perfectly, but with resilience and love. He realized then that his journey of vengeance had transformed into a mission of preservation, ensuring that Ashford Ridge would never again bend under the weight of tyranny. As evening approached, the sky painted itself in deep crimsons and purples, reflecting the fiery journey of the past months. Elias stood on the porch of his reclaimed land, looking over the desert that stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. His dog's memory tugged at his heart, a tender ache that now mingled with gratitude and peace. He reached down to pat the young pup he had adopted from the town's children, a reminder that life could bloom again even after devastation. Cutter and Hank joined him, sharing quiet words and small smiles. They knew the road ahead would still be hard, but for the first time in years, hope felt tangible, rooted in sweat, sacrifice, and the unyielding courage of one man who refused to let injustice stand. Night fell over Ashford Ridge with a serene hush, the stars blinking down over rooftops and dusty streets, illuminating a town reborn. Elias lit a small lantern on his porch, its glow soft but unwavering, casting light across the path he had fought to reclaim. The town had survived, the people had survived, and he had survived. Not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more connected to the land and hearts around him than ever before. And as the wind whispered through the empty streets, carrying promises of new beginnings, Elias finally allowed himself to breathe, knowing that the story of loss, rage, and redemption had found its rightful conclusion. Ashford Ridge was alive again. Not because the past had vanished, but because the present had been seized with courage and love, one hard-won day at a time.